Hey everybody, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is a special presentation. If you've been a fan of Judging for the Win for a while now, you know I've had hundreds, and this is my 1000th episode. After all of that, maybe some of you who are fans of the channel for a while are wondering how you're doing. And so, if you remember my DDR number 500, I gave you a practice exam with a lot of different questions that I thought would be representative of what you would see if you wanted to get certified and become a level 1 judge. Well, today we're doing the same thing but for level 2. So, the level 2 exam, this is all created, or all this information is relevant for Judge Foundry, which is the organization that certifies judges in the United States right now and Canada. So that's what I'm the most familiar with because that's where I live. The exam is 25 rules questions, which cover topics from the comprehensive rules, and there's also 15 policy questions, which covers topics from the Magic Tournament rules, the infraction procedure guide, and the judging at regular rel document. This iteration of the test is closed documents, but is untimed and requires a passing score of 80. I say this iteration of the exam because there are a few different other iterations of the exam. In past years, there was a time limit, for example, and in past years they allowed you to free access to the Magic policy and rules documents during the exams. So this is what we have right now. There's no guarantee, though, that somebody in the future might be watching this after Wizards has taken over the judge program, for example, and had new standards put in place, or else maybe another certification organization has come up that's relevant to you where you live, or maybe the people at Judge Foundry have changed their standards also. So bottom line is, this is what it is right now, and this is the format that I based today's videos on. But that's not to say that we're necessarily all looking at the same template, especially if you're watching this in the future. No, there is one other very important thing regarding the level 2 exam, which is that you can do it. You definitely have it in you to be able to pass this exam. So have some confidence, even if you have taken the exam in the past and did not pass it. Have some confidence in yourself and your ability to study and learn and understand this information. Magic is a complicated game. I know that. Everybody knows that. But with that said, let's take a look, and we'll take a look at the actual questions that I prepared for. So before we get too deep in, though, this is some information that might be helpful to you. All the card text that you see today are going to be accurate in every way that affects the answer. Reminder text is not rules text, though, so it's not guaranteed to be accurate, and reminder text should not be relied on. Amy, or with other people, any player whose name starts with A, that's the player whose turn it is. Nick, the person whose name starts with N, is Amy's opponent. And there's no other players in the game unless stated otherwise. And no player also has any cards that affect the answer other than the ones specifically mentioned in the question. Now, the rules can change, and this video took a ton of time to make, so I'm not reshooting it. If there is something that's changed that I become aware of, I'll put it in a pinned comment below. So, one final word regarding the format of these things. I'm going to read the question, and then I'm not going to read the answers. I'm just going to read the question, and then I'm going to pause, and then I'm going to start talking about what the answer is. So that's exactly the same thing that I did for the level 1 practice exam. If you're interested in playing along at home, then make sure you pause the video after I read the question so that you can review the answer choices and choose what you think the correct one would be. And which I, of course, encourage you to do, because there's only one time that you can watch this video not knowing what all the answers are. So go ahead and prepare yourselves emotionally, and let's get started. So Nick controls a Rest in Peace and casts Lapse of Certainty against Amy's Grizzly Bears spell. Into what zone is Grizzly Bears placed? And the answer to this one is it goes on top of Amy's library. Now, both of these have replacement effects. However, usually, if you've been a fan of the channel for a while now, you know replacement effects, there's an order to which they apply, and that order is chosen based on the affected player, which in this case would be the owner of the Grizzly Bears. However, that's not the entire picture, because spells like Lapse of Certainty have a self-replacement effect. It replaces part of what the spell itself is going to do, and so those always have to apply first. And so after you apply the Lapse of Certainty's replacement effect, the Grizzly Bears is no longer going to the graveyard, so the Rest in Peace would not apply to that event. So next question, can you return Herald of Kozilek with a Reborn Hope? Could you choose it with Glittering Wish? And so the answer to this question is that Devoid is a characteristic defining ability, and that means it functions in all zones, even outside of the game, and with that being the case, it is not a eligible target for either of the spells that we have here. Amy controls a Darkest Hour and a Living Terrain enchanting Nyx's island. What color is the island? And so for the answer to this one, we're going to need to know a little bit about how continuous effects work. So this is kind of a trick one. The first thing that we want to know is the Living Terrain has parts of its effect that apply in Layer 7, that would be the Power and Toughness setting, Layer 5, which would be the Color setting, and Layer 4, which is the Tree Folk and Creature card type, subtype, and super type changing. So with that being the case, Living Terrain is always going to make the island into a creature in Layer 4. And then in Layer 5, which is when both of these color changing effects are going to apply, we need to decide based on timestamps which one applies first. Notice that because we have already turned the island into a creature, the Darkest Hour will always apply to the island because the island became a creature in an earlier layer than the all creatures are black continuous effect would apply in. And so therefore we really do have a timestamp situation. Whichever one of these has the earlier timestamp will apply first, making it green or black, depending on whichever one it is, and then whichever one has the later timestamp will override that. So that is the answer to this question, is that the answer would depend on which one of these ended up, was on the battlefield latest. Alright, Nick is enchanted by Curse of Bloodletting, and he controls a Grizzly Bears that is enchanted with Pariah, which he also controls. Amy casts a Lava Axe against Nick. Which of these are possible outcomes as the Lava Axe resolves? And some of these questions you do see there is an instruction to choose all that apply, and that means that we may or may not have multiple of these being a correct answer. So you'd of course need to choose all of the ones that are correct answers to get the question counted correctly. So with this one, we actually do have two replacement effects that want to apply to the damage from the Lava Axe. And this time there is like a completely free choice. You could choose whichever one to apply first that you wanted. If we apply the Pariah first, well, that would mean that all the damage that is getting dealt to Nick is going to instead get dealt to the Grizzly Bears. And the Curse of Bloodletting is not going to be able to apply to that event anymore because it only cares about damage that would be dealt to enchanted player. Conversely, if we applied the Curse of Bloodletting first, then that would mean the 5 damage getting dealt to Nick would be doubled to 10. And then afterwards, the Pariah would still apply to that, and it would change that 10 damage to go onto the Grizzly Bears. So that would mean that these are the two possibilities. The Grizzly Bears could be getting dealt either 5 or 10 damage, depending on the choices that Nick makes. Alright, Amy has an Urza's Tower with Spreading Seas attached to it, and she also has an Urza's Mine and an Urza's Power Plant. Which of these best describes what mana will be in her mana pool if she taps all 3? And so to answer this question, let's recall that this changes the enchanted lands types to island. So with the Spreading Seas out, the land will become a land-island, and it will not be a Urza's anymore, and it will not be a tower anymore. And that means that both of these cards, which look to see if Amy controls a land that has subtypes of Urza's and tower, will see that she does not, and so they will only add 1 mana. And of course, islands normally tap for blue mana, and so that's what Amy would end up with. Okay, Amy is going to cast a Prey Upon, targeting Grizzly Bears and Nick's Sedge Scorpion. Nick responds by casting a Cloud Shift on his Sedge Scorpion. Which of these best describes what happens after the Cloud Shift resolves? And so, with this one, the Prey Upon is going to resolve because it has 2 targets, and one of the targets is still legal, the other target is no longer legal because Sedge Scorpion has left the battlefield and returned, and that means it's a new object with no connection to its previous existence. So with that being the case, the fight will not be able to happen. There's only 1 creature available to fight, and so you would not be able to have any fighting happen at all. And therefore, even though the Prey Upon resolves, nothing will happen as it resolves. Amy casts a reshape with X equals 5. She sacrifices a Darksteel Citadel. Nick responds by casting a twin cast on the reshape. Which of these best describes the result for Nick's copy? Okay, so to answer this question, we're going to recall a couple of facts about copying objects, specifically copying spells. The first is that we are not casting reshape. So that means that, with the twin cast. The twin cast does not have an instruction to copy, or to copy the spell and then cast the copy. It just says you copy the spell. So because we're not casting the copy, we do not need to sacrifice an artifact. So Nick does not need to do that. However, if the game needs to know information about a copy spell, and that information comes from what objects were used to pay the costs of that spell, it uses the objects that were used for the original spell. And so that would mean Nick does not have to sacrifice an artifact for reshape, and he still gets, the game still credits him with being able to find a 5-mana card. Alright, Amy attacks with Grizzly Bears, and she casts a Provoke targeting Nick's Mog Flunkies. Nick also controls a Hyperion and an Untapped Wastes. Which of these are legal blocks for Nick to make? Choose all that apply. Okay, so you can see that the Hyperion has an ability that says it cannot block creatures with power 3 or greater unless you pay 1. So obviously it would be legal for Nick to pay the 1 and then block with both, right? Like, I think that most people would probably agree that would be pretty obvious that you would be able to block like that. However, if Nick does not want to tap the wastes for mana, he would not be able to pay this cost. And in that case, Hyperion would not be able to block. Now, when you're deciding what blocks are legal or not, you're looking for the thing that satisfies the most requirements. In other words, something that says you have to block this turn without breaking any restrictions, such as this can't block or this can't block alone. And so if you do not pay the 1, which Nick is allowed to say that he's doing, he's allowed to not pay 1, then that would mean that Mog Flunkies would not be able to block because Mog Flunkies cannot block alone. So even though it would increase the number of requirements being met, Nick is within his rights to say I'm not paying 1, and the Hyperion and the Mog Flunkies are both staying back. So that is the answer to this question. Amy is casting Incremental Growth. Which of these best describes when she chooses how many counters each creature gets? And so the answer to this one, we're going to take a look at when you cast Incremental Growth, you have to say which creature is your target creature, which creature is your another target creature, and which creature is your third target creature. And so therefore that would lock in at the time when you're casting this spell which creature is getting how many counters. You are not allowed to change the targets after you lock them in when you cast the spell. For example, if something goes wrong and you wanted to make your 3 counters go on a different creature, you can't change your mind after you have already declared what the targets are going to be. And so with that being the case, if one of the creatures leaves play, the other 2 will still get the counters originally assigned to them, like what we said in the Prey Upon example. Because there's multiple targets, the game still is going to let the spell resolve if at least one of them stays being legal, but the number of counters that each creature gets is locked in at the time of casting. Alright, Amy untaps her 9th Doctor during her untap step. She's also enchanted with Paradox Haze. Which of these correctly describes the order Amy takes with 3 upkeep steps? Okay, so this is kind of an interesting one. We know that this ability triggers when the 9th Doctor becomes untapped during your untap step. So it does trigger during your untap step, which is the first step that happens in your turn. However, no player gets priority during the untap step, and that means that any triggered abilities that trigger during the untap step will go on the stack during the upkeep step, which is what happens afterwards. And so that means that Amy is going to be taking her normal upkeep first, and during that upkeep, both of these abilities are going to need to go on the stack. And because they have both triggered since the last time that Amy was able to put abilities on the stack, that means she can put them onto the stack in whatever order that she wants. So that's the answer to that question, is that Amy takes her normal upkeep first, and then she can choose to take either one of these first according to what order that she chooses to put those two abilities on the stack. I did have a video where I talked about Hive Mind plus Time Warp type of a spell, and that video would be helpful for you if you're trying to decide, if it's really important to you that you take the Ninth Doctor untap or upkeep first before the Paradox Haze upkeep. You might want to watch that video to see what order you would need to put those two on the stack. But you would be getting both of these upkeep steps regardless of what order you chose. Alright, Amy uses a Cytoshape to make her Sewer Nemesis into a copy of Nyx Nyxathid. Amy was the player that was chosen with both of these creatures, so which of these best describes Sewer Nemesis power and toughness after this happens? And the answer is you're going to get the best possible outcome in this case. So this and this are linked. It's called linked abilities is the rules term that we use to describe this. So the chosen player specifically means the player that you chose with this ability on Nyxathid. And these abilities function likewise. This and this, when they say the chosen player, they specifically mean the chosen player with this ability that they're both linked to. So what's going to happen is when you make the Sewer Nemesis into a copy of Nyxathid, it's going to be like if you put the Nyxathid onto a copy machine and then you pasted whatever came out over the top of Sewer Nemesis. So it's going to be a 7/7, and then it's going to get -1/-1 for each card in the chosen player's hand. But we didn't choose a player for this ability with the Sewer Nemesis. Nick chose a player for his original Nyxathid, but we don't get to copy that because that's not written on the card. When you put the Nyxathid on the copy machine, you don't get to bring any notes like that along with you. You're just copying what's physically on the Nyxathid. And so with that being the case, there isn't going to be a chosen player for the Sewer Nemesis / Nyxathid after the Cytoshape resolves. And so that means that it's just going to be a 7/7. Okay, Amy controls Might Makes Right and Hill Giant. During the beginning of combat step on her turn, Amy targets Nick's Grizzly Bears with Might Makes Right ability. Nick responds by casting a Disfigure against the Hill Giant. Which of these best describes what happens afterwards? Okay, so with this one, we can see that this has a triggered ability, and it uses the characteristic templating of an intervening if clause, right? So it says if you control each creature on the battlefield with the greatest power, and that's in between the trigger condition and the results, right? So what that would mean is that this if condition needs to be true at two specific times. It needs to be true when the ability goes on the stack, which it is, and it needs to be true when the ability resolves, which it will not be because the Disfigure is going to make this Hill Giant be a 1/1 at the time when this ability resolves. And so with that being the case, when the Might Makes Right ability goes to resolve, it will do nothing and just get removed from the stack. Okay, Amy controls a Hill Giant and has no cards in her library. She casts a Giant Ire against Nick, who's at 4 life. What happens? And so for the answer to this question, let's take a look at exactly what's going to happen. We're going to deal 4 damage to Nick, and if you control a Giant, draw a card. Now, it just says draw a card. It doesn't say you may draw a card or draw up to 1 card or something like that. Amy draws a card. She's instructed to draw a card. She has to. And so with that being the case, there's going to be 2 state-based actions that need to happen after the Giant's Ire resolves. There's going to be one for Nick because he has 0 life, and there's going to be one for Amy because she tried to draw a card and couldn't. And so both of those state-based actions are going to make the players lose the game. And so both of them are going to lose the game at the same time, so the game is going to be a draw. Alright, Amy is attacking Nick with 3 Hill Giants. Nick is going to let one of them get blocked with the Aardvark Sloth, and he's going to let 2 of them go through to his life total. Now, the Aardvark Sloth has lifelink, and Nick has a Boon Reflection. So, what best describes what happens? And so, what's going to happen is all the combat damage is getting dealt at the same time, right? So this is going to deal 3 damage to the Hill Giant. This Hill Giant's going to deal 3 damage to the Aardvark Sloth, and these 2 Hill Giants are going to go straight to Nick's face. Okay? Now, with that being the case, the lifelink is an effect of the damage. And that means that Nick is going to gain 3 life from Aardvark Sloth at the same time as all the damage is getting dealt. So the event that's going to happen in the game is Nick gaining 3 life and Nick losing 6 life. Okay? Now, damage gets processed in such a way that the first thing that happens is the damage gets dealt, and then the game decides what the results of that damage is going to be, and then after that, those results actually happen. And Boon Reflection is going to say, hey, one of the results of Aardvark Sloth's damage is that Nick's gaining life. So at that time, when the game is in that process, the game is going to determine, hey, Boon Reflection needs to double that life. So in fact, the 3 damage that Aardvark Sloth is dealing is going to result in Nick gaining 3 life, and that 3 life is going to get doubled to 6 life. And that's going to happen at the same time as he's also taking 6 from these 2 hill giants, so he actually nets with 0 life total change at all, and he stays being at 3. Alright, Amy controls a Leyline of the Void and casts a Doomblade against Nick's Highland game. Which of these best describes what happens as Doomblade resolves? So, in order to answer this one, we'll take a look at what the Leyline of the Void says. It says, if a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard, you remove it from the game or exile it instead. So, in other words, the Highland game gets exiled instead of going to the graveyard. It never goes to the graveyard, therefore, and that's what dies means. Dies means is put into a graveyard from the battlefield. And so, with that being the case, we can say Highland game did not die. It went straight from the battlefield to the exile zone, which is not dying, and therefore there would be no trigger, no gaining 2 life. Alright, which of these are legal uses for the mana produced by the bottom ability of Crucible of the Spirit Dragon? Choose all that apply. Okay, this is one of my favorite questions. I did do a video about this, like, specifically. You can search for the Crucible of the Spirit Dragon. But the punchline is, the first important factor we're going to need to know is, when it says activate abilities of dragons, okay? Now, you might think that all of these are dragons, but it turns out that you might not be right. So, first of all, Ugin the Spirit Dragon is not a dragon, right? It's a Planeswalker - Ugin. Okay, this is a dragon spirit, and this is a dragon, and this is a dragon. But this is not a dragon. It doesn't say dragon anywhere on the card except, like, in its name, and that doesn't count. It needs to be on the type line, or else it's not a dragon. Okay, so right out of the gate, we got, like, flavor fail number 1. Because, yeah, the spirit dragon, you can't cast with the bot. Okay, so another thing that you can't do is you can't plane cycle the Eternal Dragon. And you're like, well, Dave, why not? Right? Because, you know, that's an ability. Look, you know, there's a colon right there, so that's an activated ability. Plane cycling really is an activated ability. And so is this, by the way. Like this, the 3 white, return it from your graveyard to your hand. Both of those are abilities. Okay, they're both activated abilities. So you would think that you could activate an ability of a dragon with that ability, but it turns out that, like, a dragon means a dragon creature on the battlefield, or like a tribal or kindred permanent on the battle. It needs to be on the battlefield to count as a dragon. If it's in your hand or in your graveyard, that is a dragon card, and that's the reason why it had to say cast dragon spells or activate abilities of dragons. See, like, if it just said cast dragons, like, there's no way you can cast a dragon. You can only cast dragon spells. And likewise, the word dragon without any qualifiers means a dragon on the battlefield. And so that would mean that if we wanted the Eternal Dragon stuff to work, it would need to say activate abilities of dragon cards or dragon sources, or, you know, they would need to add some extra word on there to qualify it, to make it so that you would be able to spend the mana that way. Okay, now that doesn't help us with the Imperial Hellkite. Playing the Imperial Hellkite face down does not count. That is casting a spell, and even though you know it's a dragon spell, the game doesn't, because when it's face down, it doesn't have any characteristics, and one of the things it doesn't have is creature types. The game cannot see what creature types the back, you know, the face of that card has when you're casting it face down, so that is not a dragon spell, and therefore that would not count either. And also turning it face up, that is not casting a dragon spell or activating an ability of a dragon. Even though this kind of looks like an activated ability, Morph, turning stuff face up with the morph is a special action. Now, the kicker, yeah, that works fine. That's part of the cost to cast Varric's Bladewing, is paying the 3. So you would indeed be able to spend mana from the Crucible of the Spirit Dragon on that, but not on any of the others, amusingly enough. Okay, Amy's casting a Fireball. Which of these best describes the relative order when these steps happen? Here's a pro tip. If you're taking the level 2 exam, study what order you cast a spell in. This is the answer. This is, you first declare the value of X, then what creatures and players and I guess now battles and planeswalkers too that you target, and then the cost is determined, and then Amy pays the cost. And you can see that it says you deal the damage divided evenly, rounded down. If it said on the spell, like, divided as you choose or something along those lines, where you're having to choose a distribution, then that distribution would be locked in when you were casting Fireball. But this says divided evenly, so therefore that even division is going to be calculated on resolution. And that means, like, for example, if one of the targets dies, like, in response to the Fireball, everything else is taking extra damage. The damage that would have been dealt to the thing that died doesn't get wasted. So yeah, make sure you study that. That is going to be on the exam, almost 100% guaranteed. And I like Fireball as an example card because it kind of tells you on the card, like, what order stuff happens in. So for example, like, you have to choose the X damage, before you choose the targets, because every target needs to have at least 1 damage. So the X kind of, like, lets you know, you can't know how many targets you're going to be legally allowed to pick until after the X gets chosen. And likewise, it says it costs 1 more for each target beyond the first. So, like, logically, you couldn't calculate the cost before you said how many targets there were, right? So Fireball does a good job of, like, kind of illustrating all the different, like, steps. And like, a lot of the time, it'll be like that, where, if you really think about it, it only makes sense if you do it in one order. So, and if you think of, like, enough specific types of cards or effects, you can come up with, like, a catalog that'll help you decide, or, like, help you memorize what the correct order would be. Amy plays a Fairy Conclave, and then she casts Conspiracy. She names Wizard as Conspiracy enters the battlefield. On her next turn, Amy activates the 1U ability of Fairy Conclave. What creature types does Fairy Conclave have? So to answer this one, we're going to take a couple of steps. First of all, let's observe. This is kind of like the one that we had with the Darkest Hour example with the land becoming a green tree folk creature. But we can see there's one very important difference, and that difference is that both of these happen in Layer 4, right? These are both type, subtype, and supertype changing effects. Making it a fairy and making it a wizard are both going to be happening in Layer 4. And crucially, making it a creature also happens in Layer 4. And what that means is, if we apply the Fairy Conclave first, that is going to make the Fairy Conclave into a creature, and then Conspiracy can apply to it, because creatures you control are the chosen type. It only applies to Fairy Conclave if Fairy Conclave is a creature. And so, as a result, the Fairy Conclave always applies first, because the Conspiracy is said to depend on Fairy Conclave in order for it to correctly apply. The Fairy Conclave becoming a creature increases the number of objects Conspiracy applies to, and they both apply in Layer 4. So that means the Fairy Conclave depends on Conspiracy and always is going to apply. That means the Conspiracy, rather, is going to depend on the Fairy Conclave, and always is going to apply after Fairy Conclave does. And so that means it's a wizard. Alright. Now Amy's going to play a Calibrated Blast. Which of these best describes when Amy reveals cards from her library and when she chooses what target Calibrated Blast deals damage to? Alright, so this is kind of a tough one, especially if you're, like, autopiloting. So the way it works is you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. Okay, so obviously that's the first step in the resolution for Calibrated Blast. You put the revealed cards on the bottom in a random order, okay? Then the next step after that is, when you reveal a non-land card this way. Calibrated Blast deals damage equal to the card's mana value to any target. So this target that it's talking about is not a target of the Calibrated Blast spell. It is a target of the reflexive triggered ability that triggers when you reveal a non-land card this way. And what that means is that triggered ability triggers during the resolution of Calibrated Blast, and it's going to go on the stack after Calibrated Blast has finished resolving. And so therefore, this is the correct answer, choice D. Again, kind of a tricky one, especially if you were going on autopilot, because usually you would expect the targets to be chosen when the spell is getting cast. But that is intentionally not how Calibrated Blast works. They came up with a creative way to word it so that it would have the desired outcome of not needing to guess whether you were going to hit a big enough hit to be able to kill whatever creature you targeted. Amy attacks with 4/4. Nick blocks Amy's creature with 2 3/3s. Nick has a Giant Growth. Which of these best describes when Nick can cast Giant Growth and what happens afterwards? So this question is basically asking, do you know how the Foundation combat changes worked? And I did make a video about that if you want more information or a deeper rundown. But suffice it to say, there's no more damage assignment orders. Amy just says how much damage that her creatures are doing. And she can divide that damage however she wants. Doesn't have to put 3 on the first 3/3 before she can assign 1 to the next. No, she can put 2 on both. She can put all 4 on 1 if she wanted to. No restrictions on how she chooses to divide that 4 damage. Now, with that being said, Nick does have an opportunity to cast Giant Growth after the blockers are declared. But he does not have an opportunity to cast it after the damage assignment is declared. Once Amy says how she's dealing the damage, that's past the point when Nick would have an opportunity to cast Giant Growth. So that corresponds to this answer choice. During the beginning of combat step, Nick activates Whipgrass Entangler targeting Grizzly Bears. Which of the following could Amy do to allow her Grizzly Bears to attack this turn? So we'll just go through these one by one. Okay, obviously it would be possible to crack the fetch land. You definitely have priority to do that during the beginning of combat step. And then once you get an island, you could definitely use that, or a forest, to produce 1 mana to pay for the Grizzly Bears to attack. The Deathrite Shaman is a little bit weirder, though. So this is not a mana ability, the top ability of Deathrite Shaman. It has a target, and what that means is it's not a mana ability. It's just a regular activated ability that uses the stack and requires priority, just like a normal mana ability was. So if you're going to think about this, when could you activate the Deathrite Shaman to get mana? Well, you could activate it during the beginning of combat step, which is where we are right now. And then when the game transitions over to the declare attacker step, which is when attackers get declared, the mana is going to be gone because mana empties from your mana pool during the transition between steps. So that's not going to work. And it turns out that activating it during the declare attacker step is kind of a non-starter too, because the first thing that happens in that step before any player gets priority is you have to declare your attackers. And so therefore, if you need mana for the Grizzly Bears to be able to attack, you wouldn't be able to tap for mana during the beginning of or the declare attacker step either. So it's kind of a weird situation. I made a video about that. It's Propaganda and Deathrite Shaman, I believe. So you can take a look at that if you're interested. Of course, this one is definitely a non-starter. These loyalty abilities are sorcery speed only, so there's no way we'd be able to get any mana out of this and still have it in the mana pool by the combat step. Now, Sentinel Stalwart, that actually is a mana ability. You can tap the Grizzly Bears and Sentinel Stalwart, and that is a mana ability. But the way it works is when you're declaring attackers, you have to tap all of your attacking creatures first. And then after that, you calculate to see if there's any costs that you might need to pay. And if so, you get an opportunity to activate mana abilities to pay those costs. And because the Grizzly Bears already got tapped because it's being an attacking creature, before that, it would not be able to tap the Sentinel Stalwart and the Grizzly Bears both in order to make that mana. So that one would not work. And then Dress Down actually would work because guess what? The Grizzly Bears now has an ability that says it can't attack. Well, hey, guess what? If it lost all its abilities, it doesn't have that ability anymore. So, and you know, the timestamps work out. Amy would just have to not like do something stupid like respond to the Whipgrass Entangler activation by casting Dress Down. She needs to wait until after Whipgrass Entangler resolves, the ability resolves, and then she can play Dress Down, and then it will have a later timestamp, which is exactly what she needs. Now I kind of took it easy on y'all. I could have put in there like an extra choice of Amy plays like a Lightning Bolt or something against the Whipgrass Entangler, so that Nick doesn't have any clerics in play. And that would work too. If there's 0 clerics in play at the time when Amy is declaring attackers, well, then the Grizzly Bears can't attack unless she pays 0. So she can just pay 0 and then be able to attack with it. So that's another possibility that I did not put on there, but maybe I could have. All right, Amy and Adam, yeah, you better believe there's two-headed giant on this exam. You'd better believe it. There is. So, yeah, it's a two-headed giant game. Amy attacks with Cliff Threader. Only one of the two-headed giants, you know, has a mountain, obviously. So which of these describes how Mountain Walk works? So I'll give you a freebie. Mountain Walk means, you know, can't be blocked if the defending player controls a mountain. That's, you know, a paraphrase of what it means. Obviously, the test being closed documents, you would have to know that, but, you know, there's no reminder text on this one. So you actually would, you know, be expected to know that sort of thing. So yeah, what do you think? You know, like it's literally a trivia question. Like if you know the answer, great. If not, this is what the answer is. The way it works is you have to say which head you're attacking, and whichever one you're attacking, that's what it is. So if you attack the one that has a mountain, then it's unblockable, which is what you would obviously be doing. Okay, so two-headed giant again. Amy has no cards left in her library, but Adam does. What happens in the draw step? And again, this is another trivia question. If you knew it, great. If not, the answer is Amy loses, and so therefore her whole team loses. There's literally no way that you could know the answer to this one unless you just knew, right? Like, that's it. Like, you can't reason it out. You can't, like, figure it out based on, like, knowing other stuff. Like, you either know how it works or it doesn't. That's how it works. So, there you go. Hey, you know what? Two-headed giant is not the only alternate format that shows up on this exam. There is another format that's become quite popular since the level 1 practice exam video that I put out. So yeah, which of these could be played in a commander deck where your general is this card, Grist? Choose all that apply. And, okay, well, we'll just go right on through. So, having basic land types in your text does not affect your color identity. So this is Farseek is a mono green color identity, so that is A-OK. Doomblade is a mono black color identity, and guess what? This is a green black color indicator that we see on the back side of Grist. Therefore, Grist, as a general, has a green and black. That is the back face of the card has its characteristics taken into account when determining what the general's color identity is. So both these are okay. This one's no good. It has a red color indicator. Red color indicator means that this is a red card, and therefore its color identity is red. No bueno. This one is all colors for its color identity. Also no good. This Herska Sweet Tooth is kind of a sad case. If you look very carefully in the ability, you'll notice that there is an off-color hybrid mana symbol on there. There's a white and green. So Herska's color identity is white and green, which means it is not eligible to be played in a green-black commander deck. They are kind of talking about changing the rules for this one, but they haven't done it yet, and so therefore, as of the production of this video, that's what the answer would be. It would be just these two. All right, next up, and this is our last question for today. Amy and Nick are playing commander. Nick controls Isamaru, Hound of Kondo, which is his commander. Amy plays a Pyroclasm. Into what zone is Isamaru placed after it takes 2 damage? And if you play commander, you probably know that it goes to the command zone eventually, but actually the way that officially works is it gets put into Nick's graveyard first, and after that there's a state-based action that Nick can use to move it into his command zone. So this is the correct answer that describes how that would work. And so yeah, that is all 25. How did you do? So I will give you a little bit of encouragement. Don't think too much about like the actual like number that you got correct. I mean, yeah, 80% is a passing score, but you know, first of all, it's a practice exam, right? And as a practice exam, I think I probably made it like harder than what you would probably see. All of the questions that I put on there, I like thought about what other like interesting stuff I could have going on in the question, and I like made the most interesting version of the question possible, because hey, it's a practice exam. We're trying to prepare people for taking an actual exam. So why would I go easy on you on like a practice thing? But so that's one thing. I think the average difficulty level of an actual exam would probably be somewhat lower, because they would not be intentionally trying to make each question the hardest version of that, you know, style of question possible. The other thing is that like it's not really important what your like score is. What's actually important is how you know how well you know the information. Like, could you come up with the explanation and confidently describe the explanation to someone? That's a much more important measure of your like rules and policy knowledge than just like, yes, I like hit a certain threshold. This is kind of emotional. That is all I have for you today, and I hope you did well. And if not, you have 1,000 videos to go through in the backlog to review and like bone up on the areas where you're weak. There is going to be another video coming out sometime in the future where I do a policy exam, because you might have noticed there's also a 15 question policy exam that's attached to the level 2. And so that will be coming out, you know, at some point. But that is all I have for you right now. Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling. And until then, I hope you have a great day.